In the previous video, we created a bubble sort, and from memory, you should know that the bubble sort kind of goes through the array over and over and over again and compares the values next to each other and kind of bubbles up the smallest numbers to the top if you're going from least to greatest, right? If you're going from greatest to least, it's going to kind of slowly move the numbers up in the array one step at a time, and it just keeps going through the array over and over until the array is sorted. Now, another type of sort is kind of what you might do if you were going to sort an array manually, right? You would look at, if this was the array, I'd look and I was going for least to greatest. I would take the 2, right, and compare it to the 5, the 3, to all these numbers to see if it remains on top. And once I decided that, I would leave the 2 there. Then I would start with the 5, right, and I would compare the 5 to all the next numbers, right? And I would see that the 3 needs to move up, and I'd move the 3. And then once I got the 3 there, I would look at all the remaining numbers, right? And I would see if that was the smallest. And then I would look at all these remaining. And eventually I'd get down to the last 2 numbers, and if they need to swap, I would. And once I get to the end of the array, I'm done, right? So it's slightly different. I compare one number at a time, the top number, to all the rest to make sure it's in the right place. Then I look at the second number and I compare it to all the rest. And I literally go through this array kind of one time comparing it to all the rest, whereas bubble sort goes through the array many, many times and then determines that it's done when it went through the array without having to swap anything. So let's write another common sort, which is called the exchange sort. So I'm going to create another method, and we'll call it the exchange sort. And these bubble sort and exchange sort are probably the 2 sorts that you'd be responsible for knowing in an introductory computer science class, right? So again, the way the exchange sort works is it goes through the array one whole time, right? And it then compares each element to all the elements below it in the array. So I'm going to use nested loops for this, right? So the outer loop, right, is going to start at the top of the array, and it's going to go to the length -1 for the same reason as the bubble sort. It's only going to compare up to the second to last because I'm going to be looking at the next element, right? If I went to the last and I tried to look at the next, I'd be out of bounds, right? And in this loop, right, I'm now going to quickly, oh, I have a typo there, and right? I'm going to create another loop, right? And from this one, I'm going to go from the next value after I, right? So I'm going to start at the next column. So if I was 0, this one's going to start at 1, right? And this is what allows me, the outer loop is going to go through and compare first the top number to all the rest. Once it goes through that loop once, then the second time through, it's going to check the second element in the array and compare it to all the rest. So the second element would then get compared to the third and the fourth and the fifth, etc., right? So this inner loop, right, is going to go all the way to the end of the array because we're not comparing. This is the second number compared, right? And now we do the comparison, right? So if num sub I, which is the top number being checked, right? And we'll go ascending, right? So if that's bigger than the number we're going to compare to, so all the other elements in the array, if it's larger than that, then we have to do our swap, right? So the swap should be pretty quick for you now. I could actually just copy the code. Let's make that easier, right here. I don't need to keep track of whether it was swapped because in this case, we're just going to go through the array continually swapping, and when we get to the end of this outer loop, we know we're done. So in some instances, exchange sort can be quicker because bubble sort needs to go through the entire array one time at the end and not do anything, right? And realize that nothing needs to get done. Exchange sort doesn't need to do that. So in some instances, exchange sort is going to be faster than bubble sort, right? And we could actually time it before we call the method, and after we could time and calculate. But for such a short array, it's going to be almost instantaneous anyway. So now let's call exchange sort and see if this works, right? So instead of bubble sort here, I'm just going to call exchange sort, right? And let's run this and see what happens, right? So we run this, and we have an array out of bounds, and oops. And we see this at line 45, line 29. Here we go. And numj equals numj plus 1. And this is the reason, right? I copy and pasted my sort, but in reality, I didn't want to take j and swap it with j plus 1, right? I wanted to put, here, let's see, I want to put I into my temp. Then I want to say, I is replaced with j. And then I want to put, temp back into j. Okay, so that is a lesson. Copying and pasting code in this case, probably not the best answer. Okay, so now I run it again, and my exchange sort now sorts from least to greatest. And if I change my exchange sort right here and swap when it's less than, right, now if I run it, I get greatest to least. So there's my exchange sort. And again, code-wise, they're almost identical code, right? And if I actually made a method to swap, this line would be replaced with swap, num, comma I, comma j, right? And then the code would be very small. So depending on the situation and depending on the order that the array that you're passing in is done, exchange sort could be slightly faster than bubble sort. Bubble sort could be faster if certain situations with the array are different. But in general, bubble sort and exchange sort, you should be able to quickly realize the difference. And the easiest way to realize the difference, right, an exchange sort goes through each element of the array and then compares it to every other element in the array. That's why there's nested loops. Whereas bubble sort just goes through the array, right, over and over and over again. In my while loop, it goes through the array and just swaps the two that are next to each other. And it does this continually until it doesn't have to swap anymore, right? So that's the primary difference between these two sorting algorithms. Once we have the arrays sorted, we can do searches in slightly different methods than a sequential search, which we've done before. And in the next video tutorial, I am going to do a search based on the fact that the array has been sorted.